Welcome to Signals and Stories. I'm Robin LeGassicke.
And I'm Kelly Miller. This is the podcast where we unpack the signals that are shaping our industry and the stories that are shaping us.
And on this podcast, we start with Landscape Pulse, where we discuss a relevant industry topic, and then we will interview a guest who is an expert in that area. And of course, end things with our famous hot takes and headaches.
Awesome. So today's topic, we're going to be discussing MMMs. And MMMs means marketing mix modeling. That's always a mouthful to get through. And what that is it's a way to holistically look at all marketing, advertising, media activity that's in a market over a certain period of time and try and really understand the outputs, the measurement, the data, and the information of all of those things coming together as a whole and evaluate how your in-market campaigns are really working, making a business impact, and driving performance. And in a world where we're seeing signal loss, increased fragmentation, and an increased pressure on marketers to really prove out their metrics and how their ad campaigns are performing and relating to those business impacts, MMMs are having a real place to try and bring all of that information together and showcase how they can drive real performance. And at the center of all this, we're joined by our guest today, and her name is Hilary Borndahl, and she is the founder and CEO of Miix Analytics. She's got a lot to say on this topic and has spent her career working and developing in this space. And she's trying to help brands and marketers make sense of all of this. So I can't wait to dive into that with her later.
Yeah, me too. But before we get to the interview, we want to spend a few minutes discussing that landscape and maybe debunking some of the misconceptions about today's topic. So we've entered a time and space of fragmentation, and we continue to discuss this quite a lot because of the massive amounts of data points we have. And for every nuance, tactic, creative piece, et cetera, there's more and more data available. And in many ways, that takes us away from looking at that full picture of performance overall. And it can also distract and create a lack of clarity and a lack of decision making.
Yeah, and we're seeing that a lot with marketers that's really catching them off guard for those who have really focused in the performance space and have been, working digitally within their campaigns for a long time. And what we're seeing and what they've been tracking there is that immediate response of data, metrics, the return on investment that they can see almost immediately after putting an ad into market, and they optimize, they see those results and continue down that path. But what gets more complicated as the more campaigns that are added on in different channels with different tactics, there becomes layers and layers and layers, and each thing gets tracked individually in a lot of cases, and it's always chasing the ROI on that one unique bit of ad activity. And with that, there just becomes more and more and more data points, and it becomes not a data gap, but a decision-making gap about what to do with all of that information and knowing where to bring it all together to really understand how to invest moving forward and what's actually working as a whole in your ecosystem of advertising. And that's where MMM can come in and, make an impact to take that overall look and look at things as a whole instead of in a fragmented way.
Yeah, for sure. And they have been around for a long time. But it used to be something that only the sort of largest, most sophisticated brands would invest in. And even that investment would happen maybe annually, semi-annually at best. And it was slow, it was backwards looking, seen kind of more of as a reporting tool, I would say, versus a decision-making tool. But that role for MMMs is definitely changing. And it's not just about looking back anymore. It's more about, guiding clients and guiding brands forward.
I think that's the most exciting part too about what we're seeing in the evolution of this is that forward looking and how it can guide marketing campaign decisions by having that whole look into the ecosystem of advertising and what's happening in the market. And realistically, consumers don't see a brand in silo, in isolation. They have touch points with a brand in multiple ways across a long period of time. So it might be through TV or radio, and then they'll see an out of home piece as well as a digital piece. So it does become really important to understand the trail of those things and how the consumer journey is experienced with all of the points within there, and getting to a place of really understanding how all of those things led to a transaction, whether it be online or in a store, and looking at that attribution that goes along with all of those touch points.
And I think it can become a really powerful business tool from that standpoint. It really starts to separate those signals from noise and the short term performance from long term growth. And we talk about that a lot, between us and with our clients, because what can get measured day to day really can be very, very short term oriented. And it isn't necessarily building the brand or driving the business and driving the outcomes for sustainable growth. And, MMMs can bring that back into the conversation with brands and with clients and marketing teams because it sheds light on things that may not show up in that sort of normal day to day reporting that we often see.
And I think that's such a benefit here is providing some sort of guidance, and a direction of what to do with all of the data that we're seeing. And in some ways, it does give an opportunity for marketers to take a step back and ask some interesting questions around, what's really working? Where should investments lead to? What's underperforming? Or also, what am I over evaluating? Because looking at a channel in isolation is such a small part of the story. And if you take a step back from there, it's really interesting to see maybe what channels are really driving that incrementality into the consumer.
Yeah. Um, Also, MMM isn't a silver bullet. It is very complex. It requires the right inputs, the right interpretation, the right mindset, even, because it's not just about the outputs that come from that MMM. It's about knowing really how to use those outputs. And that's sometimes where marketers can struggle is that understanding. They will invest in it, but they don't necessarily understand how to operationalize it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, that's exactly why I'm really excited for our guests to come on today. I'm looking forward to seeing what Hilary has to say because she really does live and breathe in this space every day and not just help build the MMM models, but also help translate how those models can really make marketing decisions and have an impact there. So I'm excited and let's bring her on.
Great.
Hi, Hillary. We're so excited to have you here today and talk everything marketing mix modeling. Um, I've known you personally and we've worked together professionally for quite a few years. And what always stands out to me about you is you're so ambitious and you have this real willingness and desire to challenge how things are done in the space. And I think you've created a really remarkable breakthrough in this space overall. So I'm excited to dive into the work that you're doing on MMMs in general and how you're helping brands bring together data and insights and make some real impact in their business. Um, you have an incredible track record. You held some senior executive level roles at global data insight companies. And then in 2021, I believe, you started Miix Analytics. And so you're now the CEO and founder of Miix Analytics, which is very exciting. And I want to talk to you about the work that you're doing there. But to start things off, why don't you take us back a little bit and tell us, it's such a interesting space. How did you get started working in this industry and doing what you're doing?
Thanks, Kelly. It's great to be here. I think to start with the entrepreneurship journey, that began when I was really young. I always wanted to be a businesswoman. I'm not kidding when I say I grew up with a single mom who was a teacher, and every afternoon, my grandma, my mom, and I would watch The Young and the Restless. And I would see these women characters on the show, like running businesses. It was like, I don't want to be a teacher. I want to be a businesswoman. And that's where it started. I ended up taking my Myers Briggs assessment in high school and realized I was an ENFJ. the guidance counselor said, "Don't go into social work. You should go into business." I'm like, "Yes, that's probably where I should go." So I ended up getting a marketing degree, Bachelor of Commerce from Lang School of Business at the University of Guelph. And in my time in school, I even felt a calling to eventually be running a boutique agency. I just didn't know what kind. I did a co-op at a research company called Thomson Lightstone and loved the size of the company, like 40 people, everyone very well connected into the client work, providing insights to a number of different industries. And that's really where my career began in market research. I had the opportunity to move to Connecticut in 2006 and was, offered a job at the modeling group, learning marketing mix modeling, something I'd never heard of before. Again, loved it, loved the size of the company, and really that's where it all took off. That company had been acquired by Nielsen, so I ended up transitioning from working in a smaller boutique to working in big corporate for a global company. As you know, I stayed at Nielsen for over 10 years. I eventually went to Kantar, and I could say my career path had been, being groomed to be in management of a large global company, but something on my heart was still like pulling me towards that boutique entrepreneurship, a space where I could spend more time working directly with clients and with brands. And when the pandemic started in the first year of the pandemic, 2020, everyone was reevaluating their lives. And I just felt like it was my time, my calling to just go out and try my own thing.
Wow, it's amazing.
Mhm.
I think Kelly and I know that story, that similar narrative of working at a big global corporation and then feeling that pull towards something that's maybe closer to the work, closer to the brands, closer to the business, and closer to the outcomes and helping to drive that. So can resonate, resonates really well with us. Um, I think as we are going to dive into the conversation a little bit deeper, we want to talk about measurement, brand growth. I want to understand, what are MMMs and what do they do and the value that they can bring in terms of gaining insights for clients. If you could explain some of that.
Yeah, let's take it back to the basics for some of the audience that might not know what marketing mix modeling is. It is a full evaluation of every touch point, hopefully, that a brand has with the consumer, with hopes of evaluating the impact of those touch points on sales conversion or some sort of KPI. I mean, you can also run MMM on equity KPIs like awareness and consideration when data exists for that. It's more rare. You can run it on full profit, revenue, a sales metric like a tonnage volume, say pounds, kilograms, whatever the unit of sale is. And so we're trying to build models that include all of the areas of the 4 Ps of marketing: your pricing, your promotion, the different product assortment, and then of course the media exposure as well. So media is one component. Within media, we want to break it down and understand the impacts of the full traditional media buy. Digital, e-commerce, digital shopper marketing is a big space that is taking up a larger chunk of the budget each year. And so everything that is driving that conversion that has been purposeful by the brand team should be evaluated in MMM. We should also be looking at external factors and, where possible, competitive impacts. And so for external factors, if we think about this period post-pandemic, we had a large impact of COVID that actually started with the coronavirus search term in 2020. And that had a lasting impact. Then we had inflation, and that needed to go into the model. And then consumer confidence. And now I'm calling it the hangover of interest rates, where consumers have less disposable income. All of those factors should also be put into a model. So your MMM is the one place where you're throwing everything in that was happening in a recent time period, like say a 2-year, 3-year analysis, and understanding eventually what was the incrementality of all of the marketing, what was the impact on a week-by-week basis of everything happening.
That's a great description because it is so complex and there are so many factors. And I think what's interesting, what you just said there, is about looking at what's happening socially as well in the environment and how that's playing an impact in things too. Because a lot of times when we're measuring media alone, there's so many variables of other things that are happening in the market that can play a big role there, right? Um, so when an MMM is done really well, it should go beyond understanding just the media or the performance or how those activations played a role. Like we were just talking about, there's so many components there. But what should marketers actually be looking to take from it and translate into overall business results and decisions?
Mm. There's three main outputs that we start with in an MMM. So the first, as I just explained, is that understanding of what's driving volume or revenue or profit. And that would be our volumetric decomposition. From there, we want to look at the change over time. So how did a change in a media strategy, a change in marketing, like tactic usage, really impact your period volume? So on an annual basis, say the fiscal year, how did the latest fiscal year perform relative to the fiscal before? What if you inputted more media spend in market? Did that translate to more volume, to more profit? And then the last piece, as we're layering in spend of the marketing, would be the return on investment. That, platinum, gold number of, if I'm spending $1, what am I getting back? Right out is media profitable, and not just at a total budget level, but getting down into the say tactic in the budget allocation between traditional and digital, or brand versus performance marketing, and then, if possible, even further into creative asset allocation or sub-tactic mix. So really diving deep into what is driving that ROI for the business. So those are the main outputs
Okay.
of the model. But the best marketers are also using MMM to forecast the future. So taking what has happened historically and projecting that into a future period to then optimize the media mix.
Definitely. I think we're going to go into the future of, how to build that out and have that forward looking aspect as well. But before we go there, um, when companies and marketers go through this process and, work with you and develop this, what are some things that constantly surprises them as they uncover some of this information? And what are the gaps that they are sort of unexpected about what's working and what's driving their business? What do you see happen, relatively across a lot of different areas?
Yeah. Mark Ritson came to Canada last month and did a talk where Canadian marketers failed his test of understanding marketing. He highlighted in that moment that media is only 8% of marketing for most brands, because as I mentioned, all those other 4 Ps that you're doing within the marketing function. And so as I was thinking about your question ahead of time, I was laughing to myself thinking, like, why am I even surprised? Because if the Canadian marketers and brand managers are failing the test, then they probably are surprised by some of these outputs.
Right.
Like, one, media is profitable. So, like, let's not be surprised about that anymore. Let's celebrate it. I built the first norms database for Canada in my Nielsen role. And at that time, the majority of the cases were CPG, consumer packaged goods, since Nielsen is primarily focused in that industry. For $1 in, Canadian brands were getting 60 cents back on the dollar in short-term profit. And I should mention, when we talk about short-term in an MMM, it's generally the week that the media is active with the DK rate or the ad stock principle, which is I saw the media this week or heard the media this week. It's sticking in my brain. It's not just driving a sale this week. It can have an effect for the following so many weeks, which is typically 12 to 16. So say in the quarter is your short-term payout. Okay. So that number now at Miix for our latest time period, which is studies through 2025, is $1.30 back on the dollar. So we've improved as marketers over time. Media channels have improved. CPMs have normalized. I mean, I've been studying CPM since digital was included in media plans in like 2002. So I don't think anybody knew what to charge at that point for 1,000 impressions. So things have gotten a lot better. So first of all, that media is profitable is a surprise. But then the other piece is this whole theory of ad stock.
Right.
And I've even had some ABMs and brand managers that I've worked with surprised about the idea of, say, like bursts and sustaining a media plan, which I think are actually like fundamentals of media. That if you're buying in a certain key period after being dark, you want to launch heavy and then pull back and sustain a market. So there's a lot of like fundamentals that come out actually as a surprise in the MMM because we are doing a full deep dive on like everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. A lot of those principles are things, as you say, that as a media agency and as somebody who's been in this world for a long time, we tout to our clients often. And so it's great to hear that the data and the research and the MMM is backing that up. I also think that we've seen an evolution that's happened a little bit in MMMs and how they're being approached and the information that goes into it. And it does have an impact in media planning and on that look forward or that ability to sort of guide the path forward in terms of what we're doing and what brands and marketers should be doing with their spend and with their budgets. Um, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you have seen that impact in terms of channel planning or budget allocations for brands in the space.
Hmm. Yeah, there was a myth for a while that traditional was out and everyone should be moving into digital.
Mm.
I did a study for a very large global beverages company with a number of brands in the beverages space in 2015, where the CMO, I believe they had moved from another market, probably the US, moving to Canada, and declared all brands are going to spend 75% in digital and 25% in traditional. Sure enough, a year later, when we're running the annual MMM, we're starting to see that the volume's declining, ROI is coming down. It was too much of a switch. And now that we're in 2026, we could still say over a decade later, traditional is still killing it in MMMs and killing it as volume profit drivers for businesses. And that traditional buy can include television, which I highly recommend with a mix of CTV. So I'll say that. So television plus CTV, radio, out of home, like those brand building assets that get attention. And if we reference Karen Nelson Field's work on the attention economy, like attention meaning I've got your eyeballs for 2.5 seconds. And so those tactics are still working really, really well. And MMM is showing that. And then within digital, there's a big range. Like social media has been amazing in MMMs for 15 years. I don't see that changing at all. I see the use of creators and the creator economy maybe changing a little bit. Hopefully better data and influencer coming in, which primarily just means when we talk about measurement, the space of the media currency of not running the MMM measurement side, but just purely the impressions measurement. How many people saw that influencer activity? So I see that changing. Another piece is in that retail e-com media space. Like the number one ROI in our norms last year was Amazon e-com. Incredible, right? We know for CPG brands, still e-com sales are about 6%, and the rest is in brick and mortar. However, what is a little bit surprising, or now an uncovered truth, is the impact that Amazon advertising can have on brick and mortar sales, because consumers are, using different search engines. I think from this year, what we'll start to see in the future is a larger impact of AI. As long as we can get our hands on the data, like AI searches, because over half of consumers are using chat or something on a daily basis to learn about brands and their purchase decisions.
Absolutely. And that's just sort of, it's flowing in naturally, sort of that AI search, right? It now comes up like super quickly and things like that. And there's so many areas I feel like brands are sort of adapting and quickly learning in. And to your point, Amazon, like the e-com space and all of that, and how that plays a role as well in that physical purchase versus just you can tend to think about it as a closed online ecosystem, but it's not, because it really does translate to in-store too.
It does. And I mean, they've been talking about sort of the bullet design for a while of like all the different layers of ROAS or ROI that you would get from e-commerce advertising. And now we just have the data to show it. So if I can mention on that data piece, the measurement. The reason we can get so many insights from this now is because has become a lot more complex. I've been saying this for years that Canadian MMMs need to be run at a regional geography basis.
Okay.
No one should be running total national Canada. Like consumers for every single industry are very different. I mean, there's provincial regulations that make things different if we think about like a healthcare pharma
Right.
study, right? Automotive, like you're probably much more likely to buy a truck in Alberta than you are if you're living in the GTA. So, and even talking about like e-vehicles, like, are you really going to buy an electric vehicle if you live nowhere near a bunch of charging stations?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have to consider that geographic complexity and how large Canada is when we're understanding the consumers and apply that into MMM. And then on the other side, on the product, when you analyze not just a total brand sales, but down to its items or in sticking with the auto example here, like a vehicle, a nameplate, the trim line, like if you get all of that detail, then you have enough data to look at many, many coefficients. And the nerdy term for it is degrees of freedom. Like we won't get into that today, but people in the audience can look it up.
No, it's true. Like when you talked about all those inputs at the onset about what goes into an MMM, those are going to have significant differences by region. And I think it's important that brands and clients understand that. And to your other point is like different SKUs are going to sell differently by region. So how do you look at it on a national basis if you're not if you're looking for outcomes that are based on different volumes in different places in different regions? It just makes sense.
Yeah, and perhaps in the past, like say 10 years ago, if some of the vendors were only analyzing at a national basis, then maybe some spends like out of home were getting disadvantaged because those spends were getting put against national sales, but that out of home only occurred in one city.
Yeah.
And so it was a mismatch on the measurement design and how the data actually showed up in market. So we've now fixed that by having these really, really complex Bayesian models that are leveraging AI and really deep machine learning to allow for that at speed.
Yeah, definitely. I would think that you have a very unique lens on the agency and client relationship. And I'd love to hear a bit of perspective from you on how you think agencies should be working with their clients differently and how MMM maybe plays a role within that.
The best engagements are when all three of us have a seat at the table and it's a partnership. Like I really don't prefer engagements where the agency is not invited to the different delivery meetings,
Right.
like starting with even the kickoff of the project or the data review when I'm reviewing the raw data inputs. And if you're the planner or the buyer, like it would be great if you could confirm if that the data is accurate, right? And then when we get to the working session delivery and understanding, because I'm bringing a lot of math and you guys are bringing a lot of strategy. And so the second we can start putting that together, we can unlock the potential and the optimizations together much faster than if we wait and you're receiving a report after I've presented to the executive leadership team. So those are my preferred relationships. And I'm really looking now, like for my company, for Miix Analytics, at finding those engagements where everyone does have a seat at the table. Because I just think it's much more powerful. And we want to see these reports not sitting on a shelf getting dusty. Like I know it's a digital world, but everyone probably in their home or somewhere in their office has something sitting on a shelf that's getting dusty. And that is the analogy because a long time ago in research, the reports were really, really big, thick reports, and they would sit on a shelf and get dusty.
Right.
So we want to see it being used and that it's dynamic. It's a tool that right away we can take the results and we can make suggestions for the next planning cycle if we work together.
I think when you have all the groups together at the table having the conversation too, it's easier to action specific things. Like you're saying, it doesn't just sit there because everybody can see a different way in on, what insights super valuable and can be actioned in different places too. I think that's so incredibly important. I see it happen a lot with the work that we do too. Um, we talk a lot about the importance of brand building over the long term, and we do see some tension between, driving those performance results that are a really quick turnaround, um, and can sometimes override that long term focus of building a brand. Where can MMM play a role in helping balance that, and can the impact of that long term brand growth um, show up in MMM because it's often a soft metric. It's harder to really gauge, those hard data points around it for that long term growth. And do you have any examples where you've seen this done well?
Mm. In the fall of 2025, one of the industry events in Canada had both Karen Nelson Field and Peter Fields attend, and he was speaking about media wastage. I had the opportunity to have dinner with both of them
Mm.
and spoke about long-term measurement. Uh, Peter's work, from what I understand, has been looking at more annualized numbers. So over like a decade, how is a brand showing growth from investing in media? In my experience at Nielsen, we were understanding long term by looking at weekly sales, but over, say, a 5-year horizon
Right.
and understanding the impact of reducing price sensitivity. So if you can increase brand love metric over
Mhm.
time and favorability, then you should be able to command a higher price point for that product over time, which is a long-term impact of your marketing. So that's another technique, is actually measuring on a weekly basis over a very long period of time changes, like increases in base, lowering of elasticity. A third version of it is what I learned at Kantar, which is correlating media exposure to changes in brand health metrics like awareness, consideration, again, favorability, like all of the components of what makes brands like distinctive and memorable, and then favorable and seeing the purchase show up. And so they're all very different measurement techniques.
Mhm.
Typically, they all produce about a 2x long term. So
Okay.
if we're saying that my norm is $1.30 on Canadian media spend right now, short-term profit, then roughly we're expecting 260 in profit over the long term, which is going to be roughly 3 years. So you're purchasing the product within the quarter and you're getting $1.30. The next $1.30 is coming stretched out over a very long period of time. It's a tricky mathematical exercise.
Mhm.
I'm trying to crack it at Miix with our Miix Horizon tool. We have clients now that we've been studying their sales data for the past 5-6 years since the pandemic. The tricky thing is that the volatility in the market makes base trends very difficult. We've had, as I mentioned, those periods with inflation. Right now in 2026, we're seeing inflation, if you include gasoline prices, to be really impacting a lot of sales. Maybe not food inflation so much, but there's a lot of layers to it to get that understanding. And so we're trying. I'm hoping by this year I will have something that is very substantial mathematically. Otherwise, I think the best is to default to those 3 that I've referenced and their techniques, which all kind of come out to the same thing. I had the opportunity at Kantar to actually run these studies for financial services and automotive clients because Kantar has excellent brand health tracking data for those industries with weekly survey sample. So you actually have enough data points to do it. Most of the brands in Canada and even in the US that I'm working with are doing dips, maybe like annually every 6 months. And so in that case, you would have to do a method like Peter Fields, where you're looking at business reports over a long, long period of time to look at like stock value,
Right.
right? It's like you can't
Yeah.
do that mathematical exercise unless you have the data.
And when you look across that, like let's say a 5-year time period, does a brand have to be consistently in market in like an always on type of way, or can they run sort of systematic campaigns throughout to get the same idea?
I think it always depends on the category and the seasonality.
Okay.
Like one aspect of an MMM that every brand should have is a seasonality test.
Mm-hmm.
Are there key periods of increase and decline? So like we're heading into summer, we can think of a lot of brands that have a higher household penetration in summer months than in winter months. And so in those cases, you would want to re-enter the market with your media buy in the spring.
Yeah.
You can uh, y- you can confirm this or not, but you would want to launch a bit heavier to get that awareness build and get back on market, sustain over the season, and then probably not spend your money over holiday when the CPPs are higher, right? And so in that case, you're not really building it with that 5-year view. You're going to look at on this category specifically, I'm going to execute my media in this way to get the best possible returns in that year. I think the brands that are going wrong on this are not airing media for like a whole year.
Okay.
Like, and I've seen it. I've seen plans where brands have gone dark for like 2 years and then they come back with an insufficient media buy and their ROI is low and everyone's wondering like, why didn't we have this big brand return? And I'm like, because you didn't spend $5 million.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like very, very important. And we see some of that in different degrees happen across what we do all the time too, for sure.
Yeah, like I really think the understanding of investing a portion of your gross revenue is important in a brand. That number should be close to 3 or 4% if you were trying to grow a brand. Most brands in Canada are investing 1 to 2%. I have this because I have looked at a lot of data in my norms.
Yes.
And I see brands in my own book of business that each year are moving from 2%, 1.5%, 1%. I'm like, hey, board, you're at risk. If you drop below the 1% threshold, you are not going to grow your revenue next year, like let alone your profit. So I think, again, back to those basics.
Yeah.
Are we educating the boardroom and the C-suite with the basics of like, we need to have a budget of working dollars to support brand growth, but also longevity.
And often, what we see happen too is it feels like it's a risk to invest more, but it can be an even bigger risk to not invest, right?
We have these conversations with clients often, and we've used this, same numbers that you've just said, maybe, from different sources or different contexts in terms of what the investment should be to grow a brand. So it's nice to hear you have the same numbers and the same opinion. And I think it's important that marketers and brands hear this. I think it's important too that, to your point, the C-suite and the CFOs understand that. And I think that's, sort of that next level of education as we're talking about.
Definitely. So with that in mind, where do you see MMMs being misused or misunderstood? And maybe it is, as it goes up to the C-suite and relaying that information and what's been, to really tell the story effectively. But what are you seeing in the space that you want to sort of debunk that might be a myth about doing MMMs? And, is that generally around the model itself or how people tend to act on it?
Oh my God, there's just so many areas of this question.
There's too
Kelly.
many parts of that question. I'm sorry.
We could have a whole podcast just on that, on the myths. But for one, I already mentioned it. Don't let it be a dusty reporting tool. Like if I get invited to give an executive summary to like a C-suite 6 months after the period ended, that is way too long. My team is producing MMM updates from 1 to 3 months after a post period. Like it can be as fast as a month if all the data is ready very fast. Right. Those are programs where we have that whole beautiful ecosystem of agency at the table, brand team, everybody ready to give the data right away, right? The thing that is holding up MMMs the most still is somebody having an email request for data and procrastinating that in their inbox for 3 weeks and not sending the data. So the actual math of it and the reporting, we're making very fast with AI and machine learning. So that's the biggest problem right now, is that there's still this massive delay. And I think people are afraid of the results. They're afraid to show the results. And I would rather marketers approach with a fail fast attitude, like meaning try things out, evaluate it. If it's not working, course correct. We had one brand team that decided to double down on buying keywords in e-com channels to just grow share basically, and realized within like a 2-month period that they weren't getting that volume lift and share lift that they had hoped for. And so the MMM helped understand that we also weren't getting the incrementality or the ROI from it. And they quickly moved back to the previous buy, and things all started to get better again.
Right.
So, and that's like a great attitude of a marketer in an insights team to say, like, let's try it, let's measure it, let's correct it right away. And that's my biggest thing is like fear of using the results and sharing them with other people. Like, we all want to grow from these. This is an optimization tool.
Yeah, 100%. Knowledge is power. And I think that's something that, people need to understand, that if they have that knowledge and you've taken it and you've put it into a structure that they can then learn from and use from. So all of those data points that they have such a hard time sifting through to understand, you've created a systematic way for them to understand what it's doing for their business. Why wouldn't you want to look at that and see that and then be able to action on it?
Yeah, like if I was a brand director, I would want to know all the details on every brand in my portfolio. Like, it's like if you're running how you're running your own personal finances. Like, don't be afraid to open up your bank account and look at all of your statements. Like,
Yeah.
you need to open that up and learn that if you're running a business, and learn it. And it's not really difficult. We try to make it as easy as we can in terms of the marketing math and showing things very consistently.
So, for the marketers that are listening to this, then, what is the one thing you would suggest that they think about or do differently when it comes to that investment or approach? And where do they start? And how do they start if they want to make that MMM actionable?
hmm Again, like, just ask your MMM team to open up the hood, get in and understand the numbers and understand all of the trends. Like, and then use it. Don't sit around on it,
Yeah.
right? A big learning we have in recent periods is really understanding the amount of impressions you need to buy within digital on a given weekly basis. Saturation curves, or that weekly spend allocation, has been reported on a GRP basis because models are needing to be run with everything very uniform. So if the models run in GRPs, even if the media was bought in impressions, then you need to be converting that back to an impression, right? I can't come and tell you, I think that with your meta social media buy, you should buy 10 GRPs a week. You'd be like, what? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So when we learn those aspects, that's a very fast change you can make, right? Like, you can change, especially if you're looking at a portfolio of brands. Maybe you've already committed to buying a certain amount of traditional media or digital media, but you can play around with the allocation by brand or by week typically within those buys to extract the optimization. And I want to see more brands be willing to do that faster than waiting for like the next media period 4 months later.
Right. Having that ability to quickly adapt, test and learn, and, continue to grow from there as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think MMM is great to compare to making a cake. So when you're baking a cake in the MMM world, we're putting all of the ingredients in, right, to build this cake.
Yeah.
The test and learns, or even the ROAS incrementality, which often come back with different numbers than an MMM. So like each week I'll get a call. Hey, Hilary, can you explain the difference from my ecom ROAS report to the MMM ROI?
Right.
Well, yeah, because that's in a test and learn environment of that platform, not factoring in everything else that is happening in the market. Whereas MMM has absolutely everything baked into the cake. So when you're using the test and learns, it's like, what chocolate ingredient am I going to use in the cake? I'm going to use all of these test and learns and these incrementality and the digital media analytics on the assets to choose the best possible chocolate, right? And then you're going to give me the chocolate. I'm putting the chocolate into the cake. So you need to be running both as a brand manager or even as an agency partner, and looking at optimizing constantly within the digital media analytics of each channel, along with me looking at how that's performing in totality.
And that's really interesting because, we do often see a channel in isolation on its own, and how that's performing is really such a small piece of the picture compared to, the entire ecosystem of advertising, and how one thing can really build into another to create better results overall, right?
Mhm.
Mm. Um, just to sort of close things out here, I want to know about what you're seeing and thinking about the future of measurement, data, and insights, and how that's all going to affect brands and marketers and companies in the future.
I'm going to reference again Karen's work on attention metrics in attention economy. I think one of the most exciting things will be adding a layer to the inputs to MMM that factor that in, like some sort of a measure of engagement. I was in a great conversation yesterday with one digital ecom provider, and they were suggesting, like, what if you use this data set combined with the impressions to look at differences in engagement or attention to pick up the nuances between each campaign we tried to run. I thought that's a great idea. Like, let's do more of that testing, because I do firmly believe that that is the missing piece, because it's missing a measurement. And it will get better. Like 20 years ago, website impressions would not take into consideration whether something was viewed or not. I see Robin's
remember.
nodding
Yep,
her head.
I remember those days,
You remember those days, right? And you're like,
Yep.
wait, so you had X number of million, but did enough people actually scroll down on the website to see the banner out at the very bottom of the yeah. And so we improved that, right? Now it's only viewable impressions. So the same thing is going to be possible. I'm certain someone's going to solve that in the industry of the media measurement side. And then the next is just because of the sophistication of the models, I'm really excited about how fast the models can go. Like, I know my own team, I've got a couple of team members that love modeling. Most of them would say, like, after the data processing, coding, fun coding part is done, they'd rather probably clear modeling in under a week and move into reporting. Like, they don't love sitting and waiting for the model to run for hours. So, and we run, as a general principle, we run dozens and dozens of iterations before we produce a final report, because MMM to me is like a hurricane forecast. We have to debunk everything and test many, many different ways of the variables to then find the most accurate, best reporting model. So we do need time, or we need speed of computers. So I'm very excited about that. And then probably my most exciting component is applying this into the sports space. So we've been the global partner of Live Golf for the last 3 years. And that has taught me that MMM is possible globally. We measure every country that they advertise in as part of one model, which is really, really cool. And that's opened up a whole new thought for me on what's possible for, say, sports teams that are touring and executing for sponsorship. And with the deep levels that we're modeling in our own, like, Canadian MMMs now, we can factor in games that are like home games versus away games, and the difference of that sponsorship investment to get the most precise ROI. So I'm really excited. I'm going to be at a conference in June, speaking specifically about the topic of sponsorship ROI, and it is profitable as well.
Interesting. We do a lot in that space as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that and what you're learning and seeing more of. Thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like I learned so much.
Yeah, me too.
And I thought I already knew a lot, but learned even more. Do you want to tell everybody about where they can find you and learn more?
Yeah, I'd say the best channel is LinkedIn. For me personally, Hilary Borndahl. I'm the only one with my name, so it's not hard to
Makes
find.
it easy.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's not hard to find me there. And our website is miixanalytics.com. We're located in Liberty Village, Toronto, and we like meeting in person. So
Amazing.
that's probably our best way.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciated the conversation. It was really insightful, and I think a lot of people will take away a lot of great things from this. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks so much. Up next is going to be hot takes and headaches.
Okay, and our final segment is hot takes and headaches. This is where Meg is going to rapid fire 5 questions that we will give you a quick answer on.
Okay, starting off, there's an obsession with media execution to prove instant ROI, return on investment. Does every part of a campaign need to be measured for ROI? Kelly?
No, I'm going to say absolutely not. It really is a lot of components all coming together. And we really touched on that in this episode today about how you can't measure one thing in isolation. And a lot of different media and advertising tactics play a different role, and all of them come together. And some of them are about growing brand, growing awareness, and those don't need to be measured for ROI.
Okay, Robin?
Yeah, I agree that I think when we talk about ROI, we need to be really specific on what we're measuring for. So your comment of everything is driving or needs to be measured more for performance. So if we're thinking about short-termism, then yeah, we're going to measure for short-term ROI. However, as we just talked about through the MMM, there's so much more than that. There's so much more that you need to think about and build when you're looking towards a business outcome. And that could be, brand love. That can be, what does that mean for that long-termism and really long-term growth of a brand? So, no, we shouldn't be focused on measuring performance on everything.
Okay, great takes. Next question. Some say the smartest strategy is to do less things better. Agree or disagree? Robin?
I agree. I think in our business, there was a big swing towards sort of overdoing it on too many tactics or too many things to try something new or to drive innovation. I think you need to focus in and make sure that you're starting with your foundations and doing those really well first and foremost, and then building on top of that.
Kelly?
Totally agree and agree with Robin's answer. It's so easy to jump on the next best thing and lose focus of what you're doing. So I think always sticking the course and staying with what you have, and then testing and learning beyond that.
Great. Next question. The hardest part of MMM isn't building the model, it's acting on the insight factors that come from it. Agree or disagree? Kelly?
I'm going to say agree based on what Hilary said today. I think really interesting about what she's talking about, collecting dust on things and not actioning. I think it's absolutely crucial if you're making the investment into an MMM. There's so much valuable insight in there, and the real important part's finding an action plan for that.
Yeah, I
Robin?
agree. I think that, we talked about it a little bit earlier. It's sometimes people are afraid to do something differently because they are afraid to see or afraid of what that outcome is. They're used to what they have always done, and they know that there's sort of a steady return or a steady impact from that. And so actioning and figuring out what to do differently can be challenging, but that's where the real value is going to come.
Alrighty. Next question. Media budget allocations decisions are often driven more by habit than data. Agree or disagree? Robin?
Yeah, I think I would tend to be somewhere in the middle. I don't want to paint all clients and brands and what with the same brush, but yeah, people do, like I just said, sort of what they're familiar with and what they know has worked for them historically. So there's a bit of that in the habit. Um, so yeah, I'm kind of in the middle on that one.
Yeah, I'd agree. There is a lot of habit forming things that you do what you know. And sometimes it can be scary to do something different. I would say the other odd habit, which isn't so much of a habit, is um, jumping onto something you see someone else doing too. Oh,
Yeah.
my competitor's doing this, or oh, I heard this marketer is trying this, and that might not always be right for your brands. And I think that's key too.
For sure. Okay, last question, a bit personal here. What work habit are you crushing or one that you're working towards being better at? You can give me either or both. Kelly?
I'm going to say being better at consistently using some AI tools like Copilot and things like that for note taking and keeping track of everything in that way. I think there's so many new great tools that you can jump on it and then feel good about what you have, but lose track of it. And I think I'm trying to be more consistent about that for sure.
Okay. Robin?
I am going to say that I'm working on, not necessarily crushing, staying on top of my email inbox. For those of you that know me and have seen my inbox before, it tends to get a little bit out of control. And so, yes, I am leaning into how AI can help me do that, how Copilot can help me with that, to stay on top of it.
Great. Okay, that's it for questions.
Okay. And that's the end of our episode for today.
Yeah, it was a really great time talking to Hilary. I learned so much, and just want to say thanks again to her for all of that great insight and knowledge.
Totally. I think we could definitely use a follow up even from all of the information we got there.
For sure. And until next time, I'm Robin LeGassicke.
And I'm Kelly Miller.
And that's a wrap.